Hello once again. Today, I'm going to be discussing a set of ideas that I believe to be of utmost importance to each and every individual. The ideas explored throughout this dialogue will be of greater weight than the ideas of the last video. This can be considered a sequel, a part 2, or a follow-up to my previous discussion, mostly because the ideas find themselves extremely correlated. If you've not seen that talk, to summarize briefly, my goal was to break down the underpinnings of homophobia within traditional to modern frames. Once this was highlighted and elaborated upon in depth in regard to the contention and controversy around the subject, I then went on to give practical and layered advice as to how one might understand complicated ideas in relation to society such as this, and furthermore, how they might properly utilize and learn to control their minds in order to improve upon existence as a whole, highlighting the challenge this is and the necessity to face that challenge in light of ever-changing and dangerous times. Today, the ideas I wish to present center even further around the philosophy of self-actualization. I will again be reading, as these ideas are a bit complex and deserve to be expressed to the highest of my ability. Apologies in advance if it gets a bit dense at times. I figured it was best to just say it the way I knew how to say it. It does simplify and lighten up at certain parts. However, it may take a few listens at other parts to understand what is being said due to the nature of the subject. In my previous video, I began first by discussing the innate drive humans have towards ascension and self-actualization, which is heavily correlated with the difficult road. Where improvements can be made upon, despite how difficult, humans will find a way to do so, given enough time. Humans remain obsessed with progress. More so than obsession, it is biologically imbued into us. We typically cannot feel positive emotion or overall life satisfaction if we cannot observe ourselves making progress towards some goal or aim. As stated previously, no human envisions their future self and imagines nor hopes to be a weaker version of themselves now. They aspire always to improve, to have at least gained in some way or another, to have gleaned something from the fruit of life. Our entire worldview is centered around this phenomenon. Our societies centered on technological advancement. Our heroes, individuals who have reached great heights of personal human excellence, admired and revered by all. What is this innate pull? This force that compels humanity ever forward into a state of constant evolution towards an ideal? Quote, "This much I do know, that there is a power, or first cause, or an intelligence which permeates every atom of matter and embraces every unit of energy perceptible to man. That this infinite intelligence converts acorns into oak trees, causes water to flow downhill in response to the law of gravity, follows night with day and winter with summer, each maintaining its proper place in relationship to the other." End quote. What we're left with, it seems, is a moral order of the world, laws of nature not yet broken at any level. To begin to understand this, we must first look at individual morality. We are starting here because reality is a thing to be experienced, and it is experienced at the individual level. If there is a moral order to our world, then we must find it at source. Where is the source of reality? Is the source everything around us, or are we the source? Let me be clear. Without the subjective experience, the subjective individual relationship to the objective world, there would be no communion, and therefore no reality to be experienced. If there is nothing there to experience reality, then reality does not exist. If we imagine objects existing, but there is nothing there to experience these things existing, then they do not exist. Existence requires something to exist to. The word exist. Exist for who? The word existence, even in its noun form, is a verb because it requires an audience, an opposite, a duality within its presence. Existence needs something to exist to. I'm sure all are familiar with the analogy of the tree falling in the forest, with no one there to hear it. The question being, does it make a sound? A more philosophically accurate analogy would be to imagine a movie playing in a room with no one there to watch it. Whatever occurrence is happening there, that is no longer a movie. A movie takes place in the space between the perceiver and the perceived. It does not exist on the screen. A movie is not the images, the individual scenes, the characters, the music, the story, the dialogue. A movie is a conglomeration of all of those individual aspects, purely in relation to how they are perceived and interpreted by the viewer. That is where the movie exists, not on the screen. It exists in a metaspace above the screen, in relationship to its being perceived. Without an individual viewer there to perceive and interpret the collection of images, characters, songs, ideas, and overall interpreted narrative, tying them all together, There is no movie there in existence at all in any capacity. Without a perceiver, that is nothing more than a collection of meaningless images, for there is nothing there to attribute and extract meaning in a coherent relationship to it. A movie exists in the eyes and mind of the beholder. Reality itself requires somebody there to experience it in order to exist. Otherwise, it would have no one there to exist too. The objective and the subjective are engaged in a constant dance. Everything that we do to describe the objective world is done so from a subjective reference point. To describe if something is hard or soft, that's based on our own relation to it. Size referentials, whether something is big or small, is determined at a baseline subjective size, as are all measurements such as distance or time. All categories of space and time, though mathematically traceable, are experienced subjectively via the individual in a multitude of ways. Every object exists in relation to awareness as a cluster of subjective concepts, that of which is always changing, as we individuals are always changing, positing that existence fundamentally requires the relationship between reality and awareness, otherwise known consciousness, to be aware, to be conscious. The subjective world is the only parameter by which the objective world can be perceived and interacted with. Any and every conscious entity navigates reality from a subjective frame of reference. Even under circumstances where a specific consciousness is spread between several different physical locales, that network of consciousness would still result in a singular subjective reference point in experiencing the objective world. Thereby, reality is purely experienced from the subjective point of view. Each subjective entity exists as an individual reference point within a field of possibility. That field of possibility lays a wide range of actions or decisions available to the subjective entity, offering movement across this field of possibility. Now, this applies to every single specific conscious entity that interacts with reality in any way, shape, or form. They all exist as a singular, individual, subjective reference point, operating in a field of possibility within reality. Every conscious entity acts from a position of self-preservation and individual well-being. If we apply this innate trait of conscious being to its existence within a field of possibility, we are then able to simplify the parameters. Possibility is infinite. Therefore, we need to categorize that infinite. If we simplify it to the absolute bare minimum, we realize that we can navigate this field of possibility within two specific dual parameters, that which is positive or that which is negative to the individual subjective entity. Any and all actions across this field of possibility can boil down to either that which is good or that which is bad for any conscious subjective individual entity. To quantify it, one could imagine any specific action a subjective individual were to take, carried with it the movement across a duality of possibility, sitting between negative infinity to positive infinity. Negative infinity being what is bad taken to its ultimate extreme, positive infinity being what is good taken to its ultimate extreme. That if an individual could move a plus or minus 1% within a specific subjective duality in relation to itself and physical reality across time, that theoretically this 1% could be taken to infinity. All actions would exist within this field of duality and possibility. For example, plus 1% towards infinite and ultimate good, or minus 1% towards infinite and ultimate bad. If it exists at the micro level, it exists at the macro level. To simplify what has been said, subjective experience is a necessary quality of reality, for nothing can be experienced without it. The subjective individual exists within a field of possibility that has a duality within it, stretching from negative infinity to positive infinity in baseline relation to that subjective entity's own self-preservation and well-being. Negative infinity representing negative actions taken to their ultimate ideal end, and positive infinity representing positive actions taken to their ultimate ideal end. As any entity moves either positive or negative along this duality, they will move closer to what is either the ultimate ideal good, which we might assume or name to be the ultimate order or God, or they might move closer to what is the ultimate ideal bad, which we might assume to be ultimate chaos, or whatever is at the end of total degradation, perhaps the very essence of nothingness itself, absence. Here we have outlined a moral code within the subjective individual experience and navigation through the field of possibility associated with subjective interaction with physical or other reality, as a creature must behave in a way that is either positive or negative to its own specific subjective well-being, existing in its field of possibility. meaning a potential path towards the positive ideal exists to each specific entity. This seems to be a direct pathway to what humans can perceive as God and the divine, a direct moral code written into the fabric of reality and conscious experience as we know it, the code in the duality between the two. Essentially, there has to be a frame of reference by which any fundamental, autonomous, subjective entity can act in a way that is either positive or negative to its own well-being, stemming first from a good and bad polarity of what is negative or positive for the individual, taken all the way up to its ultimate extreme, existing subjectively in a field from negative to positive, with agency to move even 1% nearer to or further from what can only be described as ultimate ideals of their respective duality. Subjective experience is necessary for reality, for an object cannot exist if there is nothing there for it to exist to. It cannot just exist unto and of itself, unless it's conscious. Reality requires conscious experience to be. Consider, how could anything be possible for you if you were not an autonomous subjective entity with individual agency and free will? How could anything be possible for you if you were not a subjective entity? If you were not experiencing things subjectively, then it would be fate. The subjective allows for the manipulation of the objective. As physical beings in a physical world, any subjective experience must exist at a localized point, and this localized point, even if it were to exist in an unknown or foreign capacity to us, would still need to exist in or maintain a physical form of some level to experience the physical world. Any physical form that manifested or brought about a localized subjective point of experience would be considered a body, even if a foreign body by our standards. The only thing necessary for subjectivity is a level of conscious awareness and a localized physical or metaphysical point for the individual to exist. The reason I say metaphysical is because consciousness is a concept. We cannot grasp conscious experience or awareness. We might be able to localize it to our physical bodies, but our thoughts are abstract. Our perceptions are abstract. They cannot be held. Thoughts cannot be written into reality except via consciousness. This is a metaphysical occurrence, a necessary occurrence in the interaction and experience of the physical world. There is an objective shared reality. This can be cited with natural laws such as gravity or interactions with physical objects or occurrences. Yet, the only part of that which can be guaranteed real is what can be measured within the subjective relationship to it. Many argue that there is only a subjective world or only an objective world, that one of those takes ultimate agency over the other, stating that the world only exists in the minds of the subjective individual, or that the objective world exists separate to the subjective interpretation of it. Given the seemingly intermingled nature of the phenomena, it would be best to envision these two as codependent factors of reality, the two producing one experience, somewhere in between, both completely necessary for reality. A balance, a yin-yang. Subjective experience is thereby objective. It is an objective fact that reality is experienced subjectively, as experience requires an experiencer. As stated, even should a consciousness be split between several different locales, it would still be a singular subjective reference point in reality. Therefore, the subjective experience of individual morality, as outlined in the moral code of individual subjective being, is thereby an objective truth, which highlights a direct moral code in the primary source of objective reality. Subjective morality is an objective truth, and since the subjective experience of reality and morality is a necessary and primary objective truth, morality itself, thereby, is an objective truth, for it exists at the very first and foremost primordial level of reality, the subjective experience of reality. Every creature operates from this superposition within a field of possibility that holds within it the ultimate ideal. For beings of developed enough consciousness, every step and action could be taken with the and towards the ultimate ideal in mind. It seems for humans that is the case, as we are almost always striving for what we can view as ultimately good. If the subjective individual is required for reality to be experienced, and within that subjective frame of reference there exists a direct pathway to what is infinitely positive can only have one shape. What is at the culmination and ultimate end of evolutionary singularity, and where does morality come into play in this? If consciousness were to ascend endlessly and exponentially in a growing and positive direction, if conscious awareness were to continue growing onward and upward infinitely, at what point would that conscious awareness be aware of everything? In other words, at what point would it be connected to or indistinguishable from the infinite, from everything and all that there is, to omnipotence itself? A moral code written in as a universal law of subjective positive to negative, found in objective reality, highlights a direct pathway to God, omnipotence, infinite intelligence, and the divine, at the very cruxus of reality itself. What does it mean to be omnipotent? For starters, it means to be everything. Now, if you're one more thing than you were before, you can be considered closer to everything. That is to very loosely say that to become more is to become better, as you're more than what you were before. There are paradigms where excess becomes derogatory within our limitations, therefore the capacity for limitations must be expanded. This all exists in the framework of the fact that we are limited creatures. It also exists within the framework that we are conscious, autonomous, willed individuals, with control over the pathway and the aesthetics that we choose our movements to hold, in relation to everything we encounter, from physical to mental or spiritual. It is only by attempting to surpass our limitations that we ever do, and that we ever might. As we grow, we have direct influence over what shape that growth takes, looks like, and becomes. As a quick side note, this relates to the generality of humanity just as much as it does to the individual human. The inevitability of technological advancement invites feelings of powerlessness among many in regards to the future, in the face of possible dystopian, doomsday-like scenarios, forgetting the fact that while movement forward is to a degree inevitable, we live in the present and actually have power to influence the direct pathways we take throughout the possibility of the future. We can take the actionable steps to affect things now in order to attempt to better construct and shape the world ahead of us. This is what we've been doing throughout all of human history. At times, we are better at it than others. Now is not a good time to be bad at it. In a lackadaisical fashion, we have begun to allow technology to take the reins more and more. We seem to have no more interest in the continued use of our bodies and minds, writing ourselves out of the places where these might be used, yet perhaps we will simply find a new direction to channel our energy. Time will tell, but more importantly, we may tell time. We have a say in what our pathway looks like. We can decide the events of the future with movement now. Quote, "The aim of education that we give to others or receive from them should be, above all, to form that moral intelligence which enables us to distinguish good from evil and to lighten through life our pathway, which is surrounded by pitfalls. All other kinds of intelligence are inferior to this." End quote. As we evolve and advance morally and intellectually, the direction of humanity likely becomes less a question of whether or not we can, and instead more a question whether or not we should, in regards to our technological and physical actions. This is already present in our world and has been for a long time, as technologically, we are already capable of ending nearly all life on Earth, but have not yet done so. There are many things we are capable of that we do not do. There are also many things that we are capable of that we do that we likely shouldn't. Our pathway along the road of morality is not only always changing, but also directly is subject to our decisions and choices. This trail of ascension and individual morality does eventually evolve as systems and fields of possibilities grow more complicated. For example, social morality, empathy, and mutual benefit come from the understanding connected to growth of consciousness. As a specific subjective entity develops intellectually and traverses morally when it encounters other subjective entities, it is almost always in conjunction with the ultimate positive to reach a situation of mutual benefit, as the risk of conflict draws with it inherent higher probability and possibility of movement towards the negative ideal. Furthermore, as intelligence and understanding grows, empathy and the realization that negatives upon you as a subjective entity are ultimately no different than negatives upon another as a subjective entity, in the sense that it is detracting from the overall movement towards the ultimate ideal, becomes a more pronounced and necessary part of subjective ascension as a whole. All actions become quantified this way at a base level, especially the further evolved and aware consciousness grows of this ascension, as consciousness is awareness itself, and across time becomes an actively self-aware participator in this either upward or downward movement. In light of the collective, there is a shared moral code in relation to subjective entities and reality, one with an inclination towards ascent and harmony. As creatures evolve, their relationship with modes of being evolve as well, more complexity and understanding. As stated previously, socialization between subjective entities is the natural leaning due to the growth of understanding and empathy, and the negative connotations associated with conflict and violence. Negative sides of subjective socialization and this evolved relation with empathy and understanding under the subjective lens become correlated with objective evil. Maliciousness, for example, can be described as an individual exploiting the knowledge of their own vulnerability to bring pain on another. This begets objective evil, and how we might define that as bringing evil into the field of existence and possibility. We must understand what evil is and how it's experienced from a subjective point of view, as is everything. There exists the subjective world versus the outside world. Balance is necessary in all things. A thing is defined by its limits, what is at its limits, what's not it. That which is not the original, nor fitting into the limits. All things are defined by their opposite. No thing can exist without its opposite, otherwise it would no longer be that thing, because it would have no limitations. Therefore, it would be more than whatever that specific limited thing was or is supposed to be. Simply put, everything is defined both by what it is and what it's not. This balance of duality is necessary for the foundation of understanding anything at all, or for anything to exist within comprehension or conceivable limits at all. The polarity, the yin and yang. The subjective exists in relation to the objective, with each other at the other's limitations and opposite. We must assume at some point the two intermingle and intertwine. The answer to that, of how and where and what and why, to any of that, is beyond us. We do not understand conscious experience. However, philosophically, the idea persists that the subjective and objective are intermingled, and the line or limitation that we can understand or trace becomes the negative to positive action taken which decides the objective fact of the physical world and reality. Good and evil become objectified by the subjective individual's objective actions in relation to that subjective individual's objective relationship with morality, of which it has, because all individuals operate from a subjective lens of positive to negative. It's where the limitation, the limits, the border is met between good and evil in both the subjective and objective world. Anyways, to the point, objective evil is merely the subjective individual's malicious intention of moving in a negative direction. The subjective individual writing into the code of the universe the negative intention for nothing but the sake of destruction. That is objective, subjective evil, and as stated, reality can only be experienced subjectively. Objective evil becomes the subjective relationship with negative and the actions an individual decides to take, and with what intentions. That is the only way to measure from an objective sense if someone was being evil or not, to understand what lies at the center of their subjective intention with their manipulation of objective reality. This is a limited definition of evil, but we are imagining the ultimate negative ideal, which is that which categorizes itself as anything causing movement towards ultimate destruction, and specifically, that which is consciously intentional. Of course, we humans do not and likely will not ever operate from such a stance, as our relationship with morality is much more complicated and not merely intention-based, but also outcome-based. Now, I discussed with a friend, and they raised some very good questions that helped me to better understand the ideas as well. One question was, what is true evil? What is a real-world example of true evil? It's a tough question. To quickly put true evil into the frame of context within this ideology I'm presenting, I'll state the following. True evil is whatever stands as the antithesis to the subjective ideal. So, within context, each person exists at a subjective point of view within a field of possibility between what is ultimately good or ultimately bad for them, specifically at a subjective individual level. Their subjective experience of the positive to negative polarity is objective. All positive action or movement brings them closer to the ultimate ideal. All negative action brings them closer to the antithesis of that. They represent the extremes of good and bad taken to ultimate conclusion. Then you measure it based on meaning and direction. If moving negative, it does not take long before energy is consciously being used to move negatively, willingly, and operate in that space with no other purpose than to move further negative. Now, this next part is very important. Evil can also exist in ignorance. Since morality is a subjective experience, this is usually not considered true evil because it is intention-based. Yet, if the committer is conscious of the intention and action, then it is true. One can also run into evil based on their own subjective world frame. So say for an exaggerative real-world example, a lion eats your family. That is an extreme subjective movement away from the ideal. Now, the difference between that subjective experience of evil and what we consider true evil is if the lion were to know the way in which it would hurt you and do it anyways, purely for no other reason than to destroy and degrade both you and that which you hold as your ideal or movement towards your ideal, and consequently the ideal as a whole. As this is a conscious universe based on conscious experience, concepts like evil exist only in relation to subjective conscious experience, same as reality itself. One could also consider the decision to engage in true evil, intentional destruction, no matter how enlightened, ignorance itself, making ignorance a direct pathway to evil. Another question was, who created this spectrum? The specific positive to negative spectrum is centered around the subjective individual. It is a result of the possibility available to them in the inherent infinite. Within that infinite, as with all things, there is a duality. Movement and actions can have positive effects on individuals based on longevity and well-being, or negative. The spectrum exists from negative infinity to positive infinity. It is available to any subjective individual or experiencer. As to the origin or nature of this structure of existence, that is a question above us. All that is known is that a subjective individual can either act in a way that is either good for it or act in a way that is bad for it. At the end of positive infinity, one can imagine what is ultimately good or the ultimate good for the subjective individual. One might call it God or near to. At the end of negative infinity, one can imagine its opposite. If God is everything, the opposite of that would be the lack of everything, the antithesis to everything, so the absence of, the destruction of existence, rather than that which gives it life. Reality is based on subjective experience. The positive to negative is in relation to the individual, to conscious awareness that perceives reality and upon which reality could not be perceived without. Morality is written directly into the code of conscious experience, which is the code of reality, the code of how reality is interacted with, subjectively. Another question was if morality is unique to every individual based on their experiences. Not necessarily. It is based on what is subjectively good for the individual, based on the limitations of its current frame, in relation to the innate pull positive forward via the moral order. However, subjective entities share a collective moral field in relation to one another, as not a single limited subjective being exists in a void. They all exist in a positive to negative relation with others. As conscious awareness evolves and moves towards its ideal, which is a natural process and law of nature, the understanding of its morality and ideal changes. Yet the natural inclination of man is an ascent. Nature itself, upon simple observation, seems to imply a moral code, improvement over time, moving towards an ideal rather than degrading. Growth, a repeating phenomenon of nature, seeds turning to trees, infants turning to men, or making it so that creatures evolve in a way to become better suited to handle or exist in harmony with the needs of their surroundings. Speaking of what is considered biological evolution, intelligent social and emotional understanding, empathy, is correlated with fair play. This is something that has been attributed to the play circuit, a neurological pathway in the brain responsible for the act of fair play between socialized creatures, the act of within friendly socialized competition, of allowing the other to gain or experience positive movement for no other reason than the benevolence of a higher movement and well-being between the two parties. Abstract philosophic necessities of individual intelligent subjective consciousness, things such as emotionally intelligent empathy, relating to behaviors such as companionship, caretaking, sharing, and fair play, of which fair play itself has been proven to exist as a neurological pathway in not only the human brain, but in most mammalian life. These semi-abstract conceptual needs of subjective conscious experience seem to be in line with the innate biological makeup of intelligent life on Earth, naturally. Ideas persist that one of these shapes morality takes in nature is iterability, the ability for an action to continue for an extended duration of time. The more iterations it is able to go on for, the better, the opposite being actions degenerate and cannot go on. Iterability in morality simply means the longer you can repeat or carry out behavior without degradation. Morality, in relation to empathy, is also correlated with iterability. To continue existing for extended amounts of time, it typically works in your best favor to primarily avoid conflict, as extremes or intense conflict is a quickly degenerating endeavor over time. Empathy allows for positive socialization and the avoidance of conflict. Furthermore, those that hurt others, while that typically stems from a pre-existing pain, are more likely to hurt themselves. If they have no respect for others that are just like themselves, then they will have no respect for themselves. Empathy for others equals love and respect for others, and love and respect for oneself, likely increasing the lifespan of empathetic beings both ways. the individual and the collective working in tandem. Empathy has tied itself to iterability. Without respect for others or yourself, the longevity of your behavior loses its iterability, and the negative reaches its conclusion. Fighting and killing others can only proceed so long before it is a degrading game, putting yourself at risk, no doubt, and incurring damage a long time. Whereas working together and socializing is better for both parties across time and iteration. One incurs less physical damage and likely gains valuable resources or efforts as a byproduct of working in tandem with another, to say nothing of the emotional or spiritual side effects and benefits. Still, in regards to this area of thought, a separate friend told me that they didn't think morality existed in nature the way we think of morality. I replied to them that we exist in nature. Therefore, the way that we think of morality exists in nature, as we are creatures defining the morality. Since we exist in nature and morality is a perception-based phenomena, then the way we imagine it within our perceptions also exists within nature, our idea of it, and the way we act it out. However, the way we imagine it and the relationship we have with it is always changing. This does not mean that the moral code of the universe aligns unilaterally with human morals. The code of nature seems to lean in a direction of power. Power has many shapes and forms. Human power is primarily our intelligence coupled with physicality and other such unique variables. Morality in nature can at times very loosely be attributed to strength. The idea that might makes right is a compelling proposition in our physical world. It has certainly been the case that, in a practical sense, humanity's might allowed it to successfully maneuver through nature and reality, slowly and surely dominating that physical world, and so on. As we evolved, the tool of strength that we used to stamp our name upon reality, our intelligence, expanded. With that growth over time, our perceptions began to change, and our morality changed as well. Actions and movement we made in the past within the confines of the might we possessed at the time may no longer be justified or balanced in logic with the might of our intelligence now, in reference to all things. However, the only constant is change. Therefore, any overcorrections in the complicated field of morality to a subjective being will lead to vulnerabilities and weaknesses that will inevitably be exploited and removed. The parameters of our moral situation are always changing, yet the general archetype and structure of our morality remains constant, based on a subjective field of negative to positive in relation to an ideal. In this way, we learn from our mistakes and self-correct, and our relationship with the ideal develops. So, while might may make right at a time, in a sense, that may not be ultimately right. It is always possible that further strength, capability, and power in all realms might adjust one's understanding or relationship with the moralic truth or ideal. For example, if you had the ability to solve a situation without using violence, you likely would. Separate from the power imbued in the moral code is evolution itself. Anything that stagnates dies. What does not overcome itself dies. Think of a seed planted, growing each year into a stronger tree, forming a new ring over the old each successive cycle. The process of self-overcoming and movement forward is built into the moral code of subjective individuals. Like a beautiful flower unfolding, this evolution has many ripples, each further evolving and cascading upon the next. That is to say that morality is not necessarily what society decides, or what your peers or family decide. Morality is what an individual operating with good faith in movement towards an ultimate ideal decides. That is the only way for reality to be honestly and faithfully navigated by a being of intelligent moral consciousness. However, among a healthy and competent society and peers, the general consensus of morality should somewhat coincide and run in parallels to the moral compass of the subjective individual, as society is but the collective of said intelligent individuals, and isolation and solitude in all its forms, even spiritual or emotional, have repeatedly proven antithetical to the ideal. Not to mention the moral code we rely on is built on top of a biological foundation, traced back and derivative to the birth of civilization and our species as a whole, and is in tune with the universal laws of reality itself. Movement towards the ideal is nearly inevitable, almost as inevitable as man's sense of progress, displayed in things such as technological advancement and overall individual or collective improvement and evolution. Yet the reason that stagnation is death is due to the nature of the most valuable asset available, time. Danger lies when this innate pull is ignored due to ease or difficulty, and time passes by. Being limited conscious entities, we we exist within space and time. We have a limited amount of time to traverse this field of possibility and morality towards positive or negative that we find ourselves in. Our infinite range of possibility, while truly infinite, exists within locked, set, and finite limitations, one of those limitations being time. Error or degradation in the shape of physical calamity and mortality, such as reference to death by age, are limitations that put purpose to our actions. We do not have an infinite amount of time to move without purpose across the field of possibility. We have only a set number of finite days to reach or move towards the goals and ideals we aspire to. All time that passes and any actions committed fall under one of two categories: that which calls us closer towards our ultimate ideal, and that which brings us away from it. It becomes anything that takes away from progress or movement towards the positive is considered a negative or a distraction from. So then one consciously defines actions in a negative or positive polarity to simplify, categorizing actions as either distractions, negative, or to purpose, positive, in relationship to those actions yield to subjective relation with the ultimate ideal. We can then take a more complicated approach and consciously and explicitly define our higher ideal and outline any and all actions which align with said construct, then going to dismiss any actions which stand contrary to it. As humans, we can draw these lines in the sand within our field of possibility and the ocean of endless distraction, and understand ourselves to better navigate the mental and physical maze of our reality. The world around us is seemingly infinite, with endless distractions and activities to fill the time. Without a singular, defined, qualitative aim to guide a subjective individual through the ocean of distraction and stimulation, one might wander endlessly, burning all their time and days into actions and activities that are non-conducive to a singular, higher, moral ideal. Without an aim, one is caught adrift in an endless ocean of information. This aim is constantly formulated, ultimately in the mind. Yes, we have physical stimuli in the world around us, but if we cultivate our minds enough, the way we perceive this physical world changes. So, if one were to almost never allow his mind to drift from the necessary and relevant thoughts towards one's true goals and aims, only focus on the things that are relevant to one's purpose, concentrating on a life living by and for the ideal, one will then become what they seek in both mind and body and overall life path. Constant focus and concentration upon exclusively right thought will lead the actions towards good. Control of the mind is control over all. The body will submit to the mind. Allowing negative thoughts to flourish will breed nothing but negative actions. It is the simple law of causality and effect. All actions have a first cause and a following effect. In our world, it is very easy to track this law. Quote, realize that thought is creative, that by pursuing in a certain manner of thinking, one can not only create qualities, sentiments, and even conditions, but through thought, one can also transform that which already exists. End quote. Everything surrounding you as a human existed first and foremost as a thought existing in someone's mind. Furthermore, this is in nature at every level. Nothing occurs without having first been triggered by some specific cause. Positive action will not flower from negative thought. Negative will only produce negative. Positive will only produce positive. This goes much further than simply happy thinking. The quote, doubt bars the way. Nothing has stood in the way of man, tripped him, punished him, destroyed him, more so than the negative thoughts and doubt he allowed to infiltrate and flourish, endlessly propagate within the confines of his own mind. In a world existing in positive to negative, doubt of oneself can only be seen as an act that works in the negative in relation to man. That is to say that an individual moving along a positive to negative field of duality is most certainly moving in a negative direction when he fosters negativity and doubt within his own conscious mind. If a task is set before you and doubt is your answer, then that is no answer at all. In fact, it is the opposite of one. If an endeavor is to be undertaken and doubt and disbelief are present at first draft, they need to be replaced by the understanding of possibility and faith in oneself. The opposite of doubt is faith. The most important piece of getting something done is believing that you can. If you do not believe it will work or that it's possible, you will have no motivation, no reason to even try. You have decided the outcome before the attempt, and you have chosen failure, negative. On the other hand, the belief that some way, somehow, there's some path and some place that you can use to maneuver the reality to bring about the outcome of your desire is the most guaranteed way to manifest the reality you seek. It is a simple, practical understanding of the law. Doubt is chaotic. Faith is orderly. Chaos is negative. Order is positive. The movement of nature and man is the turning over of the random chaotic into the patterned orderly. Man has thus evolved as pattern-recognizing creatures. The pattern of a seed is to evolve into a tree, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, over and over, evolving further and further. The pattern of a human is to turn the random, chaotic, infinite possibilities of a newborn into a more specified, patterned individual. All throughout man's life, the actions and work and art created is that of taking the random, chaotic matter of the physical world and reorganizing it into a pattern that fits his purposes, his movement towards the ideal. Ultimate chaos is parallel to nihilism, and endless randomness is nothingness, nihilism, and meaningless. Ultimate order is parallel to the ideal and omnipotence, and endless order is purpose and meaning, an exclusion of the infinite plethora of excess into the precise, finite, one specified, ultimate thing. You see this in art. The phrase art is life is representative of this phenomenon. Art is a constant battle between chaos and order, chaos and random versus ordered and patterned, the natural, sporadic, and asymmetrical state of being reorganized into a designed and symmetrical state of being, which we call art. It's pointlessness versus purpose, nihilism versus meaning. To elaborate on chaos, if everything is just random nonsense, none of it matters. In the infinite ocean of reality, it becomes nothingness. But if a patterned path of purpose arises from the disorder, meaning in the face of infinite randomness, it is moving towards something. It is the eternal turning over of the chaotic into the orderly. That is art. What better to do for all eternity? Our reality is patterns. Symmetry gives meaning and purpose. The rhythm of the universe, the song. Not just random noise, but the organized pattern and movement of it all. The more the unfiltered randomness is transmuted into pattern, the more beautiful and unified will the pattern become, the more omnipotent the pattern will become. Art as life represents that transmuting process, from dead to living, random, chaotic nothing to designed, aimed, limited and striving, beautifying order. Faith co-aligns with the state of being. When one moves antagonistic to faith and order, one ascribes faith to randomness. Yet this still follows the orderly law of cause and effect. The optimist is right. The pessimist is also right. When one believes that a thing or achievement is not possible, they bring about the structured pattern of reality coinciding with that outcome and belief based on their actions. However, when one believes that a thing or achievement is possible, they too bring about the structured pattern of reality coinciding with that outcome and belief based on their actions. It is simple cause and effect. Faith begets the outcome of that faith. Faith begets faith. The belief that it will work will further instantiate that belief. It will feed you the beautiful energy of confidence, even further instantiating its outcome. It is quite literally an endless positive feedback loop, which creates the reality correlated to the thoughts, beliefs, and actions seeding it. Belief in it literally concretes its actuality. Faith is order. Many religious schools take it further. The idea of faith is potent in religion because it expressly describes this process. Faith in what? Faith in the ultimate ideal, and one's journey and progress towards it. Faith that the structure of reality is set so that every cause is followed by an effect, that action creates corresponding movement in the physical reality we occupy, and that pathways exist to assist in the cultivation and creation of the world envisioned by conscious experience. Faith that your actions can affect reality, and that the specific or right actions can create specific or right outcomes directly in congruence with the initial causality. Faith that doing the right thing breeds right outcomes. Faith that there is an order to the universe, that positive actions will create positive movement towards the infinitely positive, towards a more and more ultimate order and ideal. An idea that underlies religion is the concept of living to one's purpose, or a life filled with purpose. It means that in this infinite ocean of possibility, you walk a very narrow path, particular to you and the field of subjective morality that you exist on, taking you towards the ultimate ideal. But that's no light thing. In order to begin to understand it, one must seriously attempt to ponder the ultimate ideal. Of course, it's beyond grasp and understanding, ever-changing and ever so vast. As you develop a conception of the ideal, it will change and develop and become even more so and more so. That is why perfection is unattainable. It sits eternally above the ziggurat, forever out of reach, but always to be strived for. Faith begets faith. Faith begets the outcome of that faith. Faith begets success. Doubt begets failure. Doubt begets the outcome of that doubt. Faith in the name of an ideal. Faith that the structure of reality is set up in a way that the possibility of the attainment and movement towards the ideal exists. That is faith. It gives power and reason over despair, doubt, depravity and darkness. You may at times still feel those things, but with an aim, with an underlying belief carrying you forward, your struggle will at least be in the name of something greater. This is what it means to be great. Every man in history that we have labeled so carried with them something greater than themselves. Not only that, every man that has accomplished great things required one necessary ingredient, the belief that it could be done. No one ever accidentally became great. True greatness has only ever been achieved through overcoming great adversity, great struggle, in the name and belief that it could be done. The great man theory suggests that the story of humanity is primarily driven forward by a select few individuals, men that stood above the rest, that as the years went on, their name refused to fade, their imprint, their energy, their impact and the weight of their existence and presence as a whole was so powerful that it is felt even today, thousands of years past their death. For some, it is not quite that long yet, but the years only pass. Often, these individuals take the shape of leaders, artists, or visionaries. It is not to say that history is purely limited to the actions of these individuals, only that often their deeds carried with them the rippling effects that reshaped the course of our story, not merely once or twice, but repeatedly, where it seemed their every step moved with such weight that it altered the path of humanity over and over. Notoriety is not always an ingredient present in the lives of individuals whose actions reshaped humanity, yet it is a common theme. It does seem that once a certain level of notoriety is reached, it can only compound and increase the potency of their actions. However, many of the great men did not ever truly see the far-reaching effects of their lives, which was often made so due to their deaths, as it is our deaths that give our lives meaning that your death carries with it the weight equal to the culmination of all of your actions, and as time goes on, more is added to the story, and more weight is put on the decisions you make. Quote, "What we do in life echoes through eternity." Every so often, men arise that move the world. These men are different than ordinary men, different as defined by their actions. The great man theory and Fredrick Nietzsche's idea of the Uberman or Overman align in a sense, highlighting individuals who transcend and redefine the ordinary limits of man to shape the world. I'm not saying that all of these great men defined and set their own moral code per se on the universe. I am saying what all of these great men did throughout human history, what they all had in common, is that they saw the world in front of them, and they used their individual agency to carve their own destinies and way through life. They learned and evolved and became great through trial and error and struggle and endurance, moving in a direction towards and guided by a vision of something greater, with the faith and belief that it could be done, that it could be achieved and reached by them. That at the very, very least, even failure or not, it was possible, and they were going to try. Aim for the moon and land amongst the stars is not merely an allegory, but profound and timeless wisdom. In the journey of attempting to attain or move towards a great success, you will encounter many smaller successes along the way. If you're making an effort towards some big goal or aim, it is impossible that you will not get some kind of results in return. If your effort is genuine and competent, it's usually of a positive nature. The profundity of the statement, however, comes from its contradiction. The moon is highlighted as the big goal and aim due to its size in reference to the stars. They appear much smaller. However, that's due to the fact that they're actually much further than the moon. The statement is not merely saying that if you set your sights on an incredible aim, even in failure, you might still achieve something of perhaps less but similar value. It's saying it is actually possible to surpass it, that your success could be wilder than your wildest dreams or understanding. The stars are much further than the moon, and much larger. It is often that success stories include ideas such as this, that they never imagined their efforts would yield the results they did, that it started as something specific and turned into something much greater. Our dreams and our creations often develop a life and momentum of their own, the ideal ever changing, ever further away. Many of the greatest that ever were, by the time their story ended, did not achieve their true goals and aspirations. I'm sure that Alexander would not have stopped when he did, nor Julius or Napoleon. Yet also, within their lifetimes, in spite of that, I'm sure there were several points where their dreams expanded, or their experiences and successes surprised even themselves, that centuries and centuries, millennia later, people would still remember individuals, that their names would still be spoken of with awe and respect, nor the direction humanity might take in response to their footsteps. The rippling effect of our actions is also another reason why notoriety is not a necessary ingredient to greatness. The profound ideal of purpose guiding and overseeing an individual's movement forward towards a path that's righteous will always create corresponding effects in the world. It is literally a transmutation of the physical and spiritual experience of time, space, and matter, into a specific positive ideal. Every bit of good done creates building blocks for more good to be done. There are many great men unknown whose actions changed the course of human history. To summarize the overall idea, to approach the ideal, one must live by the ideal at all times, or as much as is within their reason and ability to do so. This means in mind and thought, and then respectively in action, devoting the only thing man has in his life, time, and put to service to the ultimate ideal, effectively martyring themselves for purpose, a beneficent slavery to the ultimate ideal, with belief in the achievability of the outcome of the positive force of their actions and lives, pushing forward towards success. The belief and faith in themselves and the law of the universe that their actions will create a positive effect within reality. That is moral clairvoyance and self-fulfilling martyrdom. Doing what you know you're supposed to be doing, working towards the ideal, more than you relax or devote time towards other endeavors, attempting to never waste a moment of the limited valuable asset of time, or at the very least, utilizing that time as much as you can towards chasing a vision. This often involves creation, building, whether it be in the outer world or the inner world, usually both. I'm sure that explains it well. I'm sure that if you rewatch this video, the idea will present itself to you until you fully grasp it within your own consciousness. I'm sure also that I could have explained it better. I only worked on this for a somewhat short amount of time, where others have dedicated years or their entire lives to this subject. In fact, it is only due to the incredible amount that they dedicated that I was able to develop this understanding and accomplish this writing and connection of ideas and patterns at all. Underneath this video, I will add books that cover or relate to this idea. As I continue reading in my journeys and find more books that relate to this topic, I will come back to this video and add them to the list so that anyone interested in these concepts will be able to more heavily dive into them. I wish you luck in your endeavors. Do not be overwhelmed by the burden of this concept. Though it is heavy, keep in mind temperance and balance as you seek the ideal, and forgiveness in whatever shortcomings or failures you might encounter. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to go negative. That's part of the process. We are imperfect creatures in a befuddling world. I do not expect anyone to simply attain this without a degree of intense struggle. As we start from near zero in our perceptions in this life, it only aligns that mistakes are bound to happen and are part of the process. It is mistakes that guide us to what does work, like a blind man feeling against the walls, searching for a handle to a door. A great man is one who recognizes failure only as one of the pathways to attainment, who makes all conditions, good or bad, serve him. Every great man has and must encounter failure at some point, and often multiple points throughout their journey, whether it be in art, the people you love, your work, your efforts. Every time you fall, focus not on the past and history of your failure, but only on the next step, the future, and reaverting yourself with the lessons you've learned to regain your footing on the proper path. Something I've personally noticed in the study of the truly great, one assured commonality between all the great men that have walked this earth that truly defined what it meant to be great, was it meant to struggle in the face of adversity and fight on, to struggle and not forsake hope, faith, courage, and the belief that the good is possible within your physical world, and therefore you maintain the willingness to try with genuine effort to bring about that result. If you do not forsake that, if you fight on in the face of struggle, and you fight until you can fight no more, until you have nothing left, you will be great. Man's moral clairvoyance is decided by his faith in his ability to follow and achieve his ultimate ideal. The belief in one's own ability, the idea that it can be true, real, and achieved. One should hold faith that being itself is more good than not, and warrants being treated as though, in light of that, it is ultimately good, and the ultimate ideal is possible. To work as though success is guaranteed simply with the understanding that it is possible. That is part of the martyring, that faith that your efforts will pay off, perhaps even if not in your lifetime, that the natural bend of the universe is towards good, faith entwined with definiteness of purpose. How can you have definiteness of purpose without the belief it will work? And how can it work without definiteness of purpose? Definiteness of purpose, followed by conviction and faith, is needed for success. You need a definite and strict purpose in order so that you're not distracted by the literal endless stimulation of the world. Without definiteness, you would wander and drift from task to task with no clear set aim or reason, not knowing what is valuable to you and what isn't because you haven't associated and familiarized yourself with your ideals. One clear goal to guide you through the fog and infinite. Quote, "Those who have no central purpose in their lives fall an easy prey to petty worries, fears, troubles, and self-pitying, all of which are indications of weakness, which lead just as surely as deliberately planned sins, though by a different route, to failure, unhappiness, and losses, for weakness cannot persist in a power-evolving universe." End quote. A central purpose makes one sturdy. Existing without one makes one flimsy and weak. Those who are unable to fixate themselves upon their true purpose or ideal should focus on performing whatever is in front of them to the best of their ability. Learning to improve in one domain gives your consciousness the ability and awareness of how to improve in other domains. Becoming the best in one area teaches your body what it feels like to strive to be the best or good at something. It teaches your mind the feeling of that relative state and aims for it in other areas and fields. Quote, "The weakest soul, knowing its own weakness and believing this truth, that strength can only be developed by effort and practice, will thus, believing at once, begin to exert itself, and, adding effort to effort and strength to strength, will never cease to develop and will at last grow divinely strong." End quote. One is either slave to his passions or slave to his virtues. Based upon the moral ideals and subjective perceptions, good and bad is decided of the two. One becomes a beneficent slave to his moral ideals, all actions and thoughts yielded to the supreme moral order, total conduct in accordance with what aligns with the proper path of idealisms, being true to one's highest moral ideas at all times. Slave, yes, but slavery is inevitable. Everyone is a slave to something, whether slave to passions of the moment or the habits that have taken over. But the higher man is a slave to his higher ideals. His thoughts, his actions, and his habits become aligned with his higher ideals, because the only way to achieve one's goals is by concentration upon it, concentration in body and mind across time. No one ever becomes great by accident. Incredible athletes, warriors, poets became great by training and practice in their craft. Quote, "Intellectual achievements are the result of thought consecrated to the search for knowledge, or for the beautiful and true in life and nature. Such achievements may sometimes be connected with vanity and ambition, but they are not the outcome of those characteristics. They are the natural outgrowth of long and arduous effort and pure and unselfish thoughts. Spiritual achievements are the consummation of holy aspirations. Those who live constantly in the conception of noble and lofty thoughts, who dwell upon all that is pure and unselfish, will as surely as the sun reaches its zenith and the moon its full, become wise and noble in character, and rise into positions of influence and blessedness." End quote. Concentration. Concentration upon their ideal across time. Maintain endurance, understand the higher purpose, and you will likely find your success in the path you're looking for. Thank you.